Welcome back to another episode of Leaders Unplugged. Today, our guest is Mr. Nathan Dowd. Mr. Dowd has been a teacher. He has also worked in a pastoral setting and is currently a dean at the high school that I have attended. Please welcome to the episode, Mr. Dowd.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jackson.
Of course. And as to start this episode, we always start with a question of just to get to know you about your career specifically. So what career did you first pursue and what made you choose it?
I think when I went to college, I wanted to get into computer technology. I used to build computers as a hobby in high school. And so I really enjoyed computer hardware. I think my lack of ability in mathematics nipped that in the bud pretty quickly. And so I realized I needed to make a shift. And I think throughout my childhood, especially into middle school and high school, many people have just said that I had a kind of a natural gift for teaching or for explaining things. And so I thought that would be a good place for me to pursue. And so I didn't, you're in college, you don't quite know everything about why you're doing what you're doing. You know, you just need to do something. And so I pursued being a teacher, and really kind of that's the direction that kind of clicked with who I am. And I've been doing some sort of teaching ever since. So.
And as a teacher, what personality traits and characteristics do you think help the most with being a teacher? But also, what are some characteristics that might hold you back?
That's really good. I think first and foremost, there's maybe a perspective when you're a teacher. And I remember I was actually at college when this happened to me. I think a lot of people get into teaching because they love the subject that they teach, and they're very much interested in the subject, which I think works maybe at the collegiate level. You can kind of have that focus. But K through 12, you really have to come to grips with the understanding that it's not really about your subject. It's about your students. And you have to love students. You have to love students. And I think I remember I was just leaving like a history class and walking to another building where I had an education class. And it just kind of hit me midway in that walk that I really enjoyed history. I really enjoyed ancient history. There was a time where I was thinking about maybe going into archaeology or something like that because of my passion for it. And I remember it just kind of struck me that if I go into teaching, it's not primarily because of the subjects that I love. That's helpful, and those are good things, but it's primarily about loving students. And so I think some teachers get into it, and they get into the classroom, and they love their subject, but they don't necessarily love their students the way they ought to. It's not that they don't love their students, but they don't realize that the student is the focus, not the subject is a way to shape the student, not for you to show what you love about a subject and hope that it makes a difference to your students. So that was a big change. I think you have to be outgoing. You have to want to be around. If you're highly annoyed by middle school, high school students, elementary students, that would be a pitfall. You wouldn't want that. I think you have to understand that being an educator is also interfacing with the family. You need to be able to interface with parents. In my current position where I'm hiring, say, a teacher right out of graduate school or something like that, they might have the love for students and they might really enjoy their subject, and that might be in a good balance, but they're extremely intimidated to talk with parents. That's a whole realm that they really haven't been prepared for. So I think you have to really have a clear view of what the objective of education is, which is to shape the heart of the student. That's what we're here to do, is to shape the heart of the student. Education from its earliest format has been about virtue, and it's been about the shaping of the way of life of a student. Again, we kind of think of it as a data dump, where you just dump a bunch of data in somebody's head so they can go and get a certification in college. That's maybe an American or modern sense of education, but that's a very small or shallow definition of education. Like, true education is about shaping the heart of the student such that they might be a flourishing adult. They might be a virtuous adult, someone who can contribute to society. who can lead in a direction that's good for uh, uh, their neighbors, good for their local government, good for their country as a whole. So I think there's some aspects there that people get just start off on the wrong foot. You don't understand what teaching's about, and so then your expectations are misaligned.
Mm. So, as a teacher, what are some ways that you can interact with the students and the family
Mm-hmm.
and help them have a goal towards virtue?
Yeah, I think it begins with imitation. So you have to live the kind of lifestyle that you would want your students to imitate. Um, and if you students, they don't. There's not necessarily a connection in the mind, but the students have an amazing ability to detect hypocrisy. They can smell hypocrisy from a mile away. And if you're a teacher who's asking your students to live and walk in virtue, and you're not willing to do what you're asking them to do, they will lose connection with that. And so you have to walk the walk. You have to do it. You want your students to love one another. Well, you need to love them. You need to model that. What does it mean? You want your students to be honest. Well, you need to practice honesty in front of them. You want your students to forgive one another. Well, you need to seek their forgiveness when you sin against them. And so there's an aspect of imitation that has to be there in order for you to be able to gain that. And then I think it's relationship. You want, um, again, intrinsically, even in an elementary setting, there's a comfort. A student wants to know that you care about them, that they're not just a number in the classroom, they're not just a grade on a piece of paper, that they are a human being and that you enjoy being with them. And again, that would be another indicator. Like if you are highly annoyed by middle school students, you probably shouldn't be a middle school teacher, right? If you if you think middle school students are goofy and maybe foolish, but you delight in helping them figure out the way, that's a good sign, right? That's a good thing. So you have to embody it. I mean, teaching is an incarnational occupation. You can't mail it in. Kids will know it from a mile away.
So, a thought came to mind where like getting to know the students on like
Mhm.
a personal level with like universities with as big of classes as they
Mhm.
have.
Mhm.
What would you say to a college student that is in a university like that? How
Mhm.
would they get to know their professor more on a on a like a first name basis and like getting to know them?
Yeah, that's going to take some impulse from the student, where I think K through 12, the impetus is on the teacher to make sure that relationship's happening. I think in college, a good teacher will naturally do that anyway. It's very difficult. Say a large lecture class, it's going to be hard. Like that again is reflecting, I think, maybe a flaw in our understanding of education. The fact that we've got a lecture hall of 200 kids and one teacher, like that's not an effective or conducive way of shaping the hearts of students. It is a conducive way of doing a data dump into their mind. And that's what we think education is in our country, is a data dump into the mind. So I think there's some structural pieces where we as a culture don't understand what education is. But I would say, as a student, to seek out those relationships, go walk up to your professor after a class, or go if they have open hours, in their office. Go just talk with them and get to know them. Help them to get to know you. Most teachers, whether it be, kindergarten or college, enjoy their students. And so if you can create that relationship with them, you're going to get far more out of the class than you ever would. And that maybe I would push this a little bit to like Gen Z, who would rather text than call, right? Like, I don't like you guys, millennials call, Gen Z texts. Go talk, go do a face to face, go find those office hours and go get to know them. Maybe even more so if it's a professor where which they seem maybe a little bit cold or a little bit distant. Like, don't be put off by that. Like, go and shake their hand, look them in the eye, and get to know them a little bit. Maybe it doesn't work out, but at least you've tried, you've done that, and that's a skill that will benefit you for the rest of your life. And so I think that would be a push I would give the college students, to make it happen. Don't assume it's going to happen to you. Go make it happen.
Right. Yeah, that initiative is it's so important, and being assertive like because you can't just wish for something to happen and it'll happen. Like you have to do something about it.
Yep.
And that's a really important thing to learn early. I really think that's true. So back to what you do as a job, what is the day in life of Mr. Dowd?
Yeah. So starts about 7 o'clock here at the school. I usually try to get through some emails. This particular position, an administrator position, far more email correspondence than there is, say, as a teacher. I have the grammar school, probably about 250 to 300 students. So you double that for parents, and that's a lot of people who could be reaching out to you on a daily basis. So I come in, try to knock some of those things out. We have a staff devotion that we do in the library at the beginning of the day, which I really enjoy. It's about 20 minutes that we're together, and we're reading scripture. We're reading the quotes from the great books that we have our students read. We sing together. That's really good. And then a lot of my day, I obviously have days where maybe it's more meeting heavy, where I'm meeting with my fellow deans across our campuses, meeting with other administrators who work in different areas, whether it be facilities or hospitality or events or whatever it may be. A lot of my job, though, is putting out fires. I think is a good way to think about an administrator is the fire department of the school. If there's a problem, an administrator needs to be there soon, typically. So that could be discipline when it comes to students, right? It can be conflict with parents, it could be conflict with teachers. It could be, again, just something that's happening with the facilities of the school. And so I spend a lot of my time walking around the school. I'm outside at recess, I'm walking down the hallways. I'm available for teachers to request my help. And I can have something written up for my day where I've got a schedule. Maybe I'm going to do some writing. Maybe I'm going to do some planning. Maybe there's some sort of program I want to work on, or something for next year. And all of that can just go out the door with a whole other set of things that I didn't plan for, but because of the nature of my job, it can take over my whole day. So there's a great deal of flexibility. You have to just hold your plans open-handedly, and some days that you can get that stuff done, and some days I have 3 or 4 kids that need to come to my office in a day, right? And that's going to take up my whole day probably. So
right, yeah, I know, I'd imagine that. And for the things that you do here at Ambrose, what do you like the most, but also what do you like the least?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like the most when we're talking about vision for the school at the dean level. I enjoy teacher training, so helping our teachers become better teachers. I really enjoy the students. Again, that's the part that I miss. I miss the classroom, but I love seeing the students in the hallway. I love walking around and seeing them, being able to interact with them, even if it's just a little wave or a little smile or whatever it is. Those things are really big highlights for me. I think the hardest part of the job, maybe because of our niche of education, that we're classical Christian education, which is just not very well known, and the way in which we do things may seem obtuse or different. I think it'd be difficult to work with parents on helping them to understand why we do what we do. There's a lot of patience that's required there, a lot of explanation, a lot of time, and saying the same things over and over and over again to help bring them along. And I have a lot of sympathy for them. So it's not necessarily something that, it's part of what it is to be a dean. I have a lot of sympathy for parents in that way, but it's so countercultural to what we're trying to do in the world, what education is in the world, what we're trying to do here. And so that can be a bit frustrating. I think there's a bit of just the bureaucracy, the fact that we're a large school, we're not a small school. There's going to be red tape. Things take way longer to accomplish. You want to start a new program, you want to do a new thing, it just takes longer because there's a lot more people who are involved. But I would say that's probably a sticking point for many different kinds of jobs once your organization reaches a certain level.
And then for this job, how would you recommend if people wanted to be an administrator or a teacher or even have pastoral experience, go into that field, what is the main recommendation you would say? Would it be college? Would it not be college?
Yeah, being an administrator, there isn't a clear academic pathway. I don't think there's any. I mean, you could do educational leadership, but specifically for classical Christian education, there really isn't a degree that you can get. Typically, the way you get into administration is you have been a teacher, and then from being a teacher, you have some ability to manage. And so, usually, schools, even if you're at one school, there will come a time where which administrative positions will open up, and that's typically how people get into it. Is they were teachers, and they've made that step to administration. Um, I think for being a teacher, I would say that, the question you have to ask, like I said, is, do you love students? Do you enjoy being in front of students? Do you enjoy explaining things to students? Do you find that to be something that's rewarding? Are you energized when your students get what you're teaching? When the light bulb goes on, are you energized by that? Is that something that really excites you? Because on the flip side of that, the cost of shaping their hearts and discipline and things like that, that's going to be difficult. Um, there's a lot of ways to get into teaching to see if you have that. I mean, there's the church, obviously, Sunday school, things like that. But there's all kinds of youth activities. I mean, like, I developed that, this kind of a crossover between pastoral ministry into education. I developed that as a youth pastor. So my pathway was, even though I got my degree in teaching, I did teaching in the public schools for a few years. And then most of my educational experience actually came in being a youth pastor, where I was just learning how to love students where they are and trying to help them to grow in their walk with God. But if you have that aptitude, then there's definitely pathways of education. Obviously, you can get a teaching degree at most universities. For classical Christian education, there are universities that offer a track for that. So there is a pathway that's kind of developed. For being a pastor, again, I think there's a bit of you need to be able to look and see if God's calling you to that. That's a great responsibility. If you're shepherding the souls of a congregation, so you think of what Hebrews chapter, I think it's Hebrews 13, talks about when it comes to that position of elder and what that means, position of pastor. So typically there's this discernment within yourself, whether or not you feel like God's calling you to this. And I remember that when I was substitute teaching, I was listening to kind of some seminary courses that I had found for free online. And I really felt through listening to those seminary courses, a call to ministry. And then, you find yourself in a congregation and you would want to see if that congregation also agrees with your call, right? You can't just say, well, I feel this way, so therefore it is. There has to be some level of recognition of those gifts from the congregation itself. And so you're going to have to commit yourself to a church, and you're going to have to grow in relationship and fellowship with them. And then there's obviously seminary. And I would say seminary is something that you should pursue if you've already, those two criteria are already met. I think some people go to seminary and assume that's the validation. Well, I got a degree from seminary, master's in theology or an MDiv or something like that. So therefore I am a pastor. Well, that's not really the qualifications that we see in scripture. So I think those are maybe, there's a lot of overlap between those, but a little bit distinct as well.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Like knowing that there are multiple options that you can go for pursuing a career. What in your time of just working in life and experiences that you've had, what is one success that you have had that you learned a very important lesson? But also, some of the most important lessons include failure. So what is a lesson that you've learned from failure as well as the success?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I would agree with you. In fact, most of my lessons have been from failure. I actually think success is very cheap in those lessons. It's good to have the successes that builds your confidence. I think as a teacher, I think there's a feedback loop of success when you are teaching and your students are not just getting it, but they're enjoying it. There's an enjoyment that you see in them. I think Augustine talks about this. There's an enjoyment that you experience through them enjoying the learning, right? That's a very powerful success feedback loop. If you tap into that as a teacher and you start to get that, um, teaching becomes the kind of thing that, like, I would do this for free. Like, it's so rewarding to see students light up and enjoy the things that you are leading them into. And so that's a very powerful thing and a very, very big shaping thing. But most of my lessons have definitely been when it comes to failure. I think as a youth pastor, I mean, I remember when it came to trying to rightly understand how to figure out what happened with two students. I listened. The Proverbs talks about this. The first group is convinced when the first person speaks, but the story changes once the second person speaks. That's a terrible butchering of that verse, but essentially, it's easy to listen to the first tale of the story and not hear the other side. And so I disciplined a student. We were at a winter camp. I disciplined a student because I thought they had done something wrong. They were out after curfew or whatever. And come to find out, when I interview another group of students, I realized that student actually wasn't to blame. And I had to go back and apologize to that student because I didn't handle that correctly. And so, like, that was a lesson that has stuck with me for a long time. So in this job in particular, as a dean, I get all kinds of accusations. I need to wait. You make sure you hear both sides of the story. Don't do anything until you first understand both sides of the story. I think as well, as far as being a dean, there's going to be times, and this happens, I interview a lot of families that come to the school, and you're not going to hit on every single one. There's a kind of family that we want to partner with at our school, and sometimes you have families who are good at faking that partnership in the interview, and then you realize that they actually weren't a good fit. And so you need to do something about either walking them through and helping them become a good fit, or helping them to see that this isn't the best school for them, right? This is actually, we're misaligned. You're going to have a hard time. We're going to have a hard time if we're not sharing the same vision about education. And so those would be maybe on a lower level. Some of those kind of failures that just happen, they're going to happen every year. Those are things that are going to happen every year. And it's humbling. It does really humble you, but it also, I think it helps to set some understandings that I can't do it all. Like, it's, being comfortable with failure. I'm a perfectionist at heart. It's really, really hard. But often you learn the best lessons through that. And every time I go through a situation which maybe I let a family in who's not as aligned as they should be, or maybe they were misaligned and I didn't see it, it does help me to become better at the next interview, right? The next interview, I'm a little bit wiser. I can ask better questions, right? I'm able to work through specifics, indicators, markers that maybe I didn't do with that previous family. So the failures are super important. I mean, I wish that was a gift I could give to our students at our school, because I think there's a perception that failure is a bad thing. I think failure can be bad if you don't do it, if you don't learn from it, right? If you don't actually do something with it. But I think failure is how we learn the best, to be honest. It's painful, but we remember way better than we remember our successes. So
It is, yeah. And I'm a psych major in college, and as I've been learning about how the brain works, people aren't motivated by success. They're motivated by escaping failure.
Yeah.
And once they experience failure, my great grandma has always told me this. She's 90 years old, and so she's lived quite a long time and experienced a lot in life. And she has always told me that experience is the best learner, because once you make a mistake, it sticks with you, and you can choose to either learn from it or not learn from it.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, most of my experience in my life, most of the great lessons that I've learned didn't come from college. It came from my mistakes. It came from, you know, that 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 teacher wisdom. And learning wisdom is by going through difficulty, it's going through suffering, and it's going through failure. But then I think the other side of that is choosing to not lie down. You need to get back up again. Get back up, try it again. That's the only way that failure becomes a success actually in your life, is you get back up and you try again. If you stay down, then failure's got you. Then it's not actually something that's helpful to you. But if you get back up and say, "Yep, made that mistake," go reconcile. If you made mistakes that require reconciliation, go apologize, go get it figured out, and then get up and try again. Tomorrow's a new day. Get up and try again. So,
yeah, very important life lesson. And working here at Ambrose, you talked about how you love working about the mission of Ambrose and forwarding that mission. What is it that you love about classical education? And since you're a Christian, why is that so important to bring into education?
yeah, I think fundamentally all forms of education are religious. There's no neutral education. I know that there's the idea that, say, like a secular government school is a neutral place. I would argue it's not. It has a worldview. It has answers to the big questions of life. It has a telos about how they want their students to be when they graduate. You can't escape the fact that education is fundamentally about shaping people uh, in a religious way. And so, as a Christian, I felt like for maybe 100 years or so, American Christians in particular have completely abdicated our responsibility to educate our children. And we've done that by just handing them over to the state. And not to say that there aren't good public schools throughout our country, but if you're talking about the movement itself, it is certainly not inculcating the Christian faith. And to say that it can just happen at home as a youth pastor, that I could, for 30 minutes in a sermon, once every Wednesday, have an impact to overturn what's happening in the public school, I'm always going to lose that battle. That was part of the reason why I left being a youth pastor and moved into classical Christian education, because the ability to spend more time shaping the hearts of students was far more appealing to me than one 30-minute sermon at a youth group every Wednesday night. That's not going to actually accomplish very much. So I'm really passionate about classical Christian education because I care about students. I want students to have an education that I didn't get to have. And I want them to have answers to the big questions in life that will stand up to a religion 101 class when they go to their secular university, right? I want them to go and say, we've already talked about this. I've already read that. We've already done a Socratic discussion on this topic. This is not new to me. It's not shock value. I'm not thrown off my rocker because of what's being said. And so that's a big deal for me. And then maybe the personal side of it is I especially the literature. I love the books that we teach. I love them. They are so amazing. And for me as a teacher, the joy of being able to bring my students into experiencing that is so unique in classical Christian education, and it's so rewarding. I think back to 10th grade and watching you guys, be able to talk about Plato's Republic in a meaningful way. It's 10th grade way, but still a meaningful way, is one of those kind of indicators that this is a really good thing. This is a really good thing. And so helping to equip generations in a way that's far better than how I was equipped, selfishly, even for my own children, like wanting my own children to have that kind of education, is a huge motivating factor for me.
Oh, yeah. And I've seen it through people, like as I've gone through high school, how for example, I think this was brought up in one valedictorian speech at graduation, how you can make classical literature jokes and people of adolescent age will get them, like Alcibiades, for example. we can make jokes about him. And it's no other kids in a secular context can do that.
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, how would you, is there a way that college students could bring a change to the secular education world and make it more aimed at becoming virtuous?
Yeah, I think the death of the great books in the university is something that should be reversed. Um, even if we were to, as a Christian, I might disagree with the worldview of a university. The fact that we have forsaken these amazing works that deal with many of the same questions that we face today is incredible to me. I, I think if there was, I think if more students had to read Plato, had to read Aristotle, had to read Augustine, they would be better for it, regardless if they're a Christian or not. These books have the ability to expand your understanding and have a deeper, a clearer view on how to talk about the big things of life. People for thousands of years have thought about these things, and for us to throw that out the window and reinvent the wheel ourselves, for us to go to TikTok and have TikTok inform us on what the big questions are and how we should answer them, I think that is the part that I lament the most, the death of the great books in the university. So I would love to see universities bring back great books programs, and I would love where students would have. To me, the university, even if you're trying to be a secular university, it should be about putting students in contact with these great ideas. It should be forcing students to think through these great big thoughts that have already been thought throughout human history, not to start over back at square one and try to reinvent the wheel again. And I know I've been most challenged in what I believe by reading those books, and I've gained a deeper understanding about what I believe because of them as well. Even those places where which I don't agree with them or they don't agree with me. But that's a really rewarding thing, to be in dialogue with someone who's lasted in their writings for 1,000, 2,000 years, right? That's a big shaping thing that I think we've just thrown away. We just don't do it anymore. So I would love to see the great books return to universities.
Right, especially with that shaping of the worldview, because your worldview is it's how you view the world, and that's how you live your life. And I know I've had my moments of I've been like hands crossed, trying to ignore.
I've never seen that, Jackson.
Yeah. And I've had my moments of like, I don't want anything that goes against my worldview. But like you're saying, those books challenge your worldview, and now you have an even deeper understanding of what you believe.
Yeah.
And that's just very important. And as we get to the end of this interview, as a final question, what is one key takeaway from all the points we've talked about, that if the people listening, what's the one thing that they should take away?
That's really good. I really would probably circle back and focus on failure. Don't waste your failures. You will fail. You're going to try a bunch of things, especially in college. You're still trying to figure out what you're trying to do, where you're trying to go. Don't be afraid to try and fail. Don't let that be something that stops you from trying. Go and read biographies of the most successful people, and a characteristic that you will see about them is that they were not afraid to try. And because they were not afraid to try, they struck on something big. I think we can really just get isolated, and we can get pulled back to the point where which we're just so paralyzed by the fear of failure, and what people might think about the fact that I could fail, that it keeps us from doing some really innovative and creative things. And so I would just really encourage, if don't waste the time you have. Try it. Try something. And if you fail, learn from it and try again. So that would be the big takeaway.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mr. Dowd, for
Of course.
joining the episode of Leaders Unplugged. And to the audience listening, we have many exciting guests that Devin and I have planned that we're going to interview. So if you like what you see today, consider subscribing for more interviews down the road. And thank you for listening to the podcast.